What if some of the most important messages in human history are still waiting to be read? Across deserts, buried beneath rivers, hidden in forgotten archives, and carved into stone, are scripts we still cannot decipher. Languages older than the Bible, symbols etched before the First Empire, codes created by civilizations who vanished without a trace, except for the writing they left behind. What do the symbols of the Indus Valley mean? Why did the Minoans invent a script we cannot understand, only to have it disappear? On a tiny island in the Pacific, why did a people carve glyphs into wood, knowing no one else could read them? Was the Voynich Manuscript a message, or a puzzle never meant to be solved? Some of these scripts look like writing, others look like dreams, but they all have one thing in common. No one alive today can say with certainty what they mean. This is not a list of ancient mysteries. This is a journey through temples and tombs, across islands and mountains, into the minds of people who spoke, recorded, remembered, and left their voices in marks we can no longer interpret. And perhaps, in decoding them, we may learn something about why we write at all. Shall we begin? The dust still clung to my boots when I stepped onto the ancient banks of the Ravi River, and there, under a collapsed brick vault, I found it. A small square seal, soapstone, warm from the sun, carved with strange animals, a bull, a unicorn-like beast, and above them a sequence of signs, sharp, deliberate, older than Rome, older than pyramids. These were the markings of the Indus script, and in that moment I knew I was staring into the silence of a civilization that had written, and then disappeared. The cities of the Indus Valley rise from the soil like sunken ships: Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira. Vast cities built of fired brick, threaded with sewers and citadels. But amid the engineering, the planning, the granaries and wells, lies something even more mysterious: a script we still cannot read. On tablets, seals, pottery shards, even on copper blades, the Indus people left behind inscriptions. Most are short, rarely more than 5 symbols in a row. A few run longer, looping across tiny plates of steatite no bigger than a matchbox. The symbols are etched with care: fish, tridents, loops, chevrons. Some repeat, others appear only once. There is rhythm here, structure, purpose, but no translation. Many have tried to crack it. Some say it is not a language at all, but proto-writing, symbols of trade and identity rather than speech. Others believe it hides a Dravidian tongue, an ancient cousin of Tamil or Brahui. There are theories of lost Vedic codes, forgotten dialects, even celestial maps. But the truth? It remains just out of reach. The real challenge is the absence of a Rosetta Stone. No bilingual inscription to guide us, no long texts to compare patterns, and no consensus on what sounds these signs might represent. Without knowing the language beneath, we are like wanderers in a dark room, tracing shapes on the walls but never grasping the story. And yet, the signs are everywhere. Seals that may have marked ownership or trade, tokens buried with the dead, inscriptions near wells and city gates. They suggest a society not just functional, but literate, complex, connected. I remember kneeling beside a crumbling drainage channel, where a child's toy had been found, marked with signs no one could read. Did children learn the script? Were there schools, scribes, or was it the domain of merchants and priests alone? I could feel the questions pressing in around me, like the monsoon clouds building on the horizon. And what of their silence? Unlike other ancient cultures, the Indus people left behind no grand monuments to kings, no war records, no victory steles. Their script does not boast. It does not praise gods or name heroes. Instead, it hums in the background, transactional, anonymous, deeply enigmatic. Some tablets seem to cluster around symbols we might call numbers. Could these have been ledgers, inventories of grain or cattle? Others appear near ritual objects. Were they prayers, spells, contracts? The possibilities are endless, and each one alters how we see them, as traders, as farmers, as priests, or perhaps something altogether different. I kept the seal with me as we packed up camp that night, held it under the flickering light of a lantern. The signs were shallow but crisp, unweathered, as if someone had pressed it just yesterday, as if the script was still alive, merely waiting for someone to listen closely enough. But for now, the Indus script remains one of history's deepest silences, a voice caught in clay, whispering through time. And as I turned the seal over once more, I wondered, what other languages had vanished without a trace? What other scripts lay buried beneath centuries of forgetting? And that led me to another island, another spiral, a clay disc that spoke in circles and which is never truly spoken at all. Shall we go there next? The wind off the Aegean was warm when I arrived at the ruins of Knossos. The sea was close. I could smell the salt in the air. Stone columns cast long shadows across the sun-baked floors of the palace, and the walls still held the color of myth. Red, ochre, blue. This was the heart of Minoan Crete, a place of labyrinths and legends. And buried beneath centuries of dust, I found tablets, small, flat, baked from clay, covered in signs that the world has not yet learned to read. They call it Linear a script named not for what it says, but for how it looks clean, linear strokes pressed into soft earth. I lifted a fragment from the earth, no bigger than a postcard. The signs curved slightly, angled like reeds swaying in water. Each one marked with care, perhaps by a priestess, a merchant, or a royal scribe. And yet, for all its beauty, we do not know what these tablets say. Linear A was used by the Minoans over 3,500 years ago. Their cities flourished while the pyramids were still young. Their ships crossed the Mediterranean before most civilizations had even carved their first stones, and their writing, found on tablets, pottery, and ritual objects, speaks of an advanced culture, but it speaks in riddles. We have found hundreds of inscriptions, lists, inventories, labels, but the language behind them is still unknown. We know its cousin, Linear B. That script was cracked in the 20th century and revealed the language of Mycenaean Greek. But Linear A resists. Its vocabulary is different. Its grammar, alien. It seems to represent a language that vanished when the Minoan world fell, a tongue that left no descendants. I walked through the corridors of the palace, past frescoes of leaping bulls and dancing women, and I imagined those who once lived here, traders returning from Egypt, priests preparing rituals deep within the sanctuaries. Did they write prayers in the script? Decrees? Inventories of oil and grain? Or were these records of divine offerings, tallies of a god's wealth? One tablet I held seemed to list items beside numbers, symbols like jars, cows, maybe textiles. The numbers were easier to recognize, a familiar rhythm of repetition. But the items themselves? Uncertain. Every sign we think we recognize could mean something else entirely. every guess opens new doors and dead ends. What makes Linear A especially haunting is how close we are. We have the signs. We know how to pronounce some of them thanks to Linear B, but the meanings still locked away. It is as if we can hear the melody, but not the lyrics. A song hummed behind stone walls. And then there are the ritual objects. Libation tables carved with a script, buried in sacred spaces. Inscriptions curved around the rim, too short to translate, too mysterious to ignore. Were they blessings, instructions, names of gods we no longer know? I stood in the central court of Knossos, sunlight pouring over the stone. The palace was silent now. No more chants, no more footsteps, only the wind curling through the ruins and the faint trace of letters in clay, letters that once recorded the heartbeat of a civilization. We think of history as something written, something told, but here the story is all shape and silence. The Minoans built a world rich with color, with music, with trade and ritual, and yet their words, their very language, remain outside our reach. And just as I was about to leave, I found another shard. A tablet snapped clean in two. The writing ended mid-thought, as if frozen, as if the scribe had stopped and never returned. And so we move on, further east, to the shores of an island where writing curled into strange forms, the Cypro-Minoan script. Another voice in the dark, waiting for us to listen. Shall we continue? The air was thick with the scent of sun-baked stone and wild thyme when I arrived on the island of Cyprus. Waves curled against the shore below me, hissing across rock and sand. I was standing in a place once threaded by traders and sailors, a hub between continents. The sea behind me whispered of Egypt, of the Levant, of forgotten harbors. And beneath my feet, a script carved into clay, hidden for centuries in silence. They call it Cypro-Minoan, a script born from the legacy of Linear A, yet shaped by the rhythms of this island. I found it pressed into clay balls, on shards of pottery, on slender tablets that cracked at the edges like dried leaves. I picked one up from the dirt. It had been fired by accident, caught in a fire long ago and preserved by fate. Its symbols curled and arched like reeds in the wind, familiar, yet unreadable. Cypro-Minoan first appeared over 3,500 years ago, a time when palaces were rising across the Mediterranean and empires were stirring in the east. The people of Cyprus were traders, metallurgists, and scribes. They carried copper and tin across the waves, and with them, their writing. A script that evolved here, on this island, and then vanished just as mysteriously. We have hundreds of inscriptions. Most are short. Some are so faint they barely survive. Others are bold, confident, as if meant to last. The signs look like Linear A, but they have changed, shifted. This was not merely imitation. It was transformation, a new voice emerging from an old tongue. And yet, we do not know what that voice said. Some believe the script was syllabic, each sign representing a sound. If so, we might expect it to reveal names, places, transactions. Others think it was used in ritual, that it carried prayers or temple accounts. But without a bilingual inscription, without a Rosetta Stone, we are left guessing. I remember turning one of the tablets over in my hands. It was small, curved slightly from drying in the sun. Lines of text ran across its face, pausing just before the edge where time had taken its toll. What did it say? A shipment of copper? A contract? A hymn to an island god? I held it up to the light, but it kept its secret. And then there are the clay balls. Dozens have been found, each one pierced with a hole, likely tied to something, perhaps to goods or documents or doors. They bear inscriptions too, short sequences. Could they be labels? Identification markers? Every theory brings more questions. Unlike other scripts of the Bronze Age, Cypro-Minoan was not carved in stone or etched in bronze. It was written in clay, fragile, impermanent, and often discarded. Most of it has crumbled away. What survives are fragments scattered across time and space. They speak of the script in use for over 4 centuries, yet only whispers remain. I sat beside a field wall as the sun dipped low. The cicadas had started their song. In my pack was a rubbing of one tablet, its lines traced by soft graphite. I studied it again, trying to follow the curves, the flow, the rhythm. The script danced across the page, silent but purposeful. Whatever it said, it mattered to someone, a scribe, a trader, a priest, perhaps even a child learning to write. And then the thought came, as it often does, how many scripts like this have we lost entirely, ones that left no trace at all? For every Cypro-Minoan, how many vanished without even a name? From Cyprus, my path curved south and west, toward Crete again, but this time not for Linear A. There, hidden in the ruins of a palace, was a single disc, a disc that spiraled inward like a riddle carved into clay. Shall we follow it? I found it in a room filled with silence. The air was cool, sheltered by stone. Dust floated in sunbeams that filtered through broken shutters. And there, resting in a case barely longer than my hand, was a single clay disc, perfectly round, fired hard, etched with symbols that flowed not in rows or columns, but in a spiral, curling inward like a labyrinth, or like a thought that never truly ends. They call it the Phaistos Disc, discovered over a century ago in the ruins of a Minoan palace on the island of Crete. It is one of the most mysterious artifacts ever found, both because of its unique construction and because of what is written on it. 75 different symbols, arranged into over 200 groupings, pressed into clay with what may have been the world's earliest form of movable type. I remember staring at it for the first time. The disc was no larger than a man's palm, yet it pulled at me like something vast. The symbols looked almost playful. Human figures, birds, flowers, tools, spirals, helmets. Each stamped into the soft clay, marching in a perfect spiral from the edge to the center. It did not look like a document, it looked like a ritual, a message meant to be followed, or perhaps performed. No one knows what it says. Some believe it is a hymn. Others think it is a game board, a prayer, a list, a challenge. There are those who claim to have deciphered it, but the truth is, every theory feels incomplete, because no other artifact shares its language. No other object uses these signs in this way. It stands alone, like a song whose melody survives, but whose words were never recorded. What makes the disc even stranger is how it was made. The symbols were not carved, they were stamped, pressed into the clay with individual tools. This was not scribbled in haste, it was designed, printed, crafted with intention. Some scholars believe this implies a kind of early printing technology, a prototype of mass communication. But if so, where are the others? Why was only one found? I lifted a replica under museum light. Its weight was modest, but it carried something heavier. A silence, a stillness, as if it held not just words but ritual. The spiral layout suggests movement, recitation, perhaps even music. Was it meant to be turned slowly? Read aloud as a chant? Performed as a rite? Its discovery in the Phaistos Palace adds another layer of mystery. This was not Knossos, the better-known seat of Minoan power. Phaistos was more distant, more isolated. Yet here, someone pressed these signs into wet clay, fired it, and then left it. For us, or perhaps for no one. Some believe it is not Minoan at all, that it came from elsewhere, brought by a traveler or trader from an unknown land. The signs do not match Linear A, nor do they appear in any other known script. It is as if a single voice spoke once and never again. I returned the replica gently to its stand and looked once more at the spiral. It does not feel chaotic. It feels chosen, measured, like something encoded with purpose. But the purpose sleeps. As the day faded and the halls emptied, I lingered, listening, waiting, hoping the symbols might stir. But they did not, and so I turned my gaze east, toward the deserts of ancient Persia, toward an even older puzzle, one carved not in spirals, but in rows, rigid, deliberate. A script from a city of stone, the earliest of its kind in that land. Shall we go? The sun was low when I arrived at the edge of the plateau. The heat had settled into the rocks, and the desert wind stirred only the dust. Before me stood the remains of an ancient city, long crumbled, half swallowed by time. This was Susa, once the beating heart of Elam, a kingdom older than Babylon, older than Persia, and in its broken halls we found a language cut into clay, written by hands now forgotten, a script born before memory. They call it Proto-Elamite, the oldest known writing system from Iran. It first appeared over 5,000 years ago in the cities that flourished along rivers now dry. Tablets have been unearthed in great numbers, most of them dense with symbols. Over 1,000 unique signs, and not a single one fully deciphered. I held one of those tablets under a desert sky. It was rectangular, thick, its surface covered in neat lines of wedge-shaped symbols. Not like cuneiform exactly, but something earlier, something more experimental. The signs felt mathematical, measured. Some repeated in clear patterns, others stood alone like stray thoughts. And still, after more than a century of study, we cannot say what they mean. The writing appears almost exclusively on administrative tablets. Some are clearly lists, inventories, accounts. There are symbols for cattle, grain, beer, textiles. Others appear to be numerals, grouped in repeating clusters. But beyond that, mystery. The language that the script represents is unknown. No parallel texts, no bilingual guide, only the symbols and the silence between them. What makes Proto-Elamite so elusive is its isolation. It did not give rise to another script. It did not evolve into something else. It appeared, it was used, and then it disappeared, vanished, like the cities that once echoed with its voice. Within a few centuries, it was gone, replaced by other systems, other tongues. Some believe the script was written in a language unrelated to anything we know, a linguistic isolate. Others think it may be distantly linked to Elamite, a later language of the region. but no proof has ever held. Without knowing the sounds, without a key, we cannot map meaning onto the signs. I walked through the ruins of Susa as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of sand and old stone. I imagined the scribes who once sat in these chambers, pressing styluses into clay, recording quantities for temples, for kings, for markets we no longer see. Did they understand that their writing would one day vanish? That the meanings they shaped would dissolve into the earth? One tablet I studied was unusually complex. Dozens of lines, symbols arranged with care. The numbers seemed clear, but what was being counted? Slaves? Offerings? Livestock? A treaty? A law? The answers drift just beyond reach, like shapes behind frosted glass. Some tablets bear corrections, signs overwritten or erased. That tells us something. It tells us that the scribes were learning, that they were thinking, that this was a script still being formed, still finding its shape, a system alive in its time, but now frozen. As twilight fell, I stood at the edge of a dry riverbed. I thought of how much had passed through this place, how many caravans, how many traders, how many voices, and how little remains. Just these tablets, just these signs, echoes of a world we still struggle to hear. And just when I thought I had seen the strangest of scripts, I found myself heading toward Europe, toward a river valley where symbols were carved not into clay, but onto pottery. Symbols that some say are not even writing at all. And yet, they persist. Shall we follow that trail? I had followed the river for days, its path winding through the low hills of the Balkans. The waters moved slow and brown beneath the weight of autumn leaves, and on the far bank stood a village older than the wheel, Vinča, a place whispered about in archaeological circles, a settlement from 7,000 years ago. Long before writing, they said, that scattered in the soil here were signs, marks pressed into clay, patterns cut into pottery, symbols that should not exist this early. And yet, the Vinča symbols, found across southeastern Europe, etched onto bowls, idols, and tablets, some are straight lines, others are geometric forms, crosses, loops, ladders, trees. Many repeat across great distances. They show up from Serbia to Romania, from Bulgaria to Hungary. The same signs, the same hand, or perhaps the same mind, moving across a vast and ancient world. The people who made them lived in dense, organized villages. They fired pottery in kilns. They worked copper long before most others. Their homes were laid out with care, their society deeply rooted in the rhythms of the land. And among their daily tools, these symbols appeared. I sat beside a hearth pit, long, cold, and turned a shard of pottery in my hand. It bore 3 marks evenly spaced, too deliberate to be decoration, too consistent to be random. But what did they mean? Were they ownership marks, tokens of identity, a code of the sacred, or were they the first attempts at written language? Some scholars say yes, that the Vinča signs represent the earliest known form of script, older than Sumer, older than Egypt, a proto-writing system that never evolved, never spread, but glimmered here for a time before vanishing. Others are cautious. They argue that the signs may have held meaning, but not language. Perhaps they were religious, perhaps symbolic, but not speech made visible, not writing in the truest sense. The debate continues, quiet and unresolved, like the marks themselves. What cannot be denied is their purposefulness. Some artifacts carry long sequences of symbols. Others repeat certain signs in familiar pairs. There is structure here, rhythm, a kind of grammar without words. I remember looking at a ceramic spindle whorl, its surface etched with tiny crosses and dots. A craft tool, functional, but also a message, perhaps only to the maker, perhaps to something greater. The Vinca people left no written records, no grand monuments, but they left these signs, and they left them everywhere, on figurines, suggesting ritual, on tools, suggesting utility, on tablets, suggesting record. This was not an isolated act. It was a culture of marking, of encoding something deeper into the material of daily life. I traced the symbols on a clay figure under fading light. Its face was blank, its body stylized, but across its chest were lines that crossed and split, forming a tree or perhaps a ladder. I could not tell, and that was the beauty of it. These were not just artifacts, they were questions. Were the Vinca trying to capture thought, memory, belief? Did they mean for these marks to last, or were they never meant to be read, only to be felt? As I packed my tools that evening, the river behind me whispered through the reeds. The same river those people would have known, would have walked beside. Their voices are gone, but the symbols remain, like footprints in stone. And just beyond the mountains, in another corner of the ancient world, I would soon find bronze artifacts bearing their own cryptic signs, seals from a vanished kingdom, weapons with words we cannot read. Shall we go there next? The mist hung low over the basin. Moisture clung to the trees like ancient breath. I had come to the heart of Sichuan, a land wrapped in river fog and deep memory. Here, long before the rise of the Qin or the Han, two ancient kingdoms had flourished in shadow, Ba and Shu. Little is known of them. Their cities are gone, their voices silent, but scattered across the soil, forged in bronze and carved with care, their words remain. They were found on weapons, on ritual vessels, on small bronze seals no larger than a man's palm. Intricate, beautiful, covered in symbols unlike anything from the better-known scripts of China. Not Chinese characters, not oracle bones, something older, stranger, entirely their own. They call it the Bashu script. 200 symbols have been catalogued. Many appear only once. Others repeat with subtle variation. Some look like animals, others like human figures. Some resemble tools or weapons or abstract forms that defy classification. I held a blade once, dull now, green with age. Along its spine, a series of signs marched like silent sentinels. It felt ceremonial, heavy with meaning. The Ba and Shu cultures rose in this basin over 3,000 years ago. Isolated by mountain and river, independent, distinct, their people crafted elaborate bronzes, gold masks, and vast tombs. They traded with distant lands, yet retained something deeply local. This script may have been their private language, a record of their gods, their rulers, their rites. But what did they write? That remains the mystery. Some seals appear to carry names, perhaps of kings or priests. Others are inscribed on tools and weapons, possibly ownership marks or talismans of power. But there are no long texts, no records, no grammar to follow, just fragments. Symbols in bronze pressed into earth, surfaced centuries later by accident or patience. I remember visiting a museum in Chengdu. The room was dim, the displays quiet, the artifacts lit like relics in a shrine. One seal in particular drew my attention. A square bronze tile, its surface smooth from handling, its underside carved with 4 symbols, repeated nowhere else. Were they a name? A place? A spell? Some scholars believe the Bashu script was invented independently, unrelated to the scripts of the Central Plain. Others suspect it was a sacred code, used only in ritual, a language of the elite or the divine. Theories branch like the rivers here, but none reach the sea. The seals themselves suggest importance. They were not casual, not scribbled or hidden. They were meant to be seen, to be used. Some may have stamped clay, others were likely ceremonial, and all of them, every last one, speak to a world that believed in the power of symbol. As I walked through a dig site near the banks of the Tuo River, I thought of the scribes who once carved these marks. Did they know their script would be lost? Or did they believe it would live forever in bronze? Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. I stepped carefully, watching for loose soil, broken fragments. Somewhere beneath my boots, more symbols may have been sleeping. Waiting. From the highlands of Bashu, the path turned far south, across the sea, across time, to a speck of land in the Pacific, where another script clings to wood, carved by hands that once saw stars differently. A language that reads like pictures, but speaks nothing we understand. Shall we go to Rapa Nui? The ocean had swallowed the horizon. I arrived at Rapa Nui, Easter Island, with salt in my lungs and wind in my coat. The land rose gently from the sea, dotted with moai, those towering stone faces turned inland as if watching something long gone. But behind those silent sentinels, buried in the island's fading memory, lies something even stranger, a script, a writing carved into wood called Rongo Rongo. It is one of the few writing systems in the Pacific and one of the most mysterious anywhere in the world. I first saw it in the island's museum. A charred wooden tablet, cracked with age. On its surface, rows of glyphs had been carved in tight, orderly lines. Human figures, birds, crescent shapes, plants, and something like eyes, each one repeated in strange rhythms, some upright, others reversed. As I leaned closer, I noticed the writing moved in alternating directions. Balstrafidon like an ox plowing a field, left to right, then right to left, flipping each line. Rongo Rongo is one of the few known scripts to emerge in isolation. There are no signs it was borrowed or adapted from outside systems, and that is part of what makes it so astonishing. On this tiny island, thousands of kilometers from the nearest continent, a culture developed a form of writing, or at least a highly systematized symbol system, and then it was lost. The earliest accounts of Rongo Rongo come from the 19th century, when missionaries began to collect the tablets. But by then, the island's traditions had fractured. The culture had suffered collapse, wars, slave raids, disease, and the last people who might have remembered the script's meaning were gone. Not one person alive could read what the ancestors had carved. There are only a couple dozen tablets known to survive. Most are small, a few are long, once part of ceremonial staffs. Many show signs of fire. Some were reused. One was found as the blade of a paddle. Whatever these texts once meant, They were no longer sacred when they were found. Scholars have tried to decipher them. Some think Rongorongo may record genealogies or chants. Others suspect calendars, agricultural instructions, or origin myths. The repetition of certain signs hints at grammar, structure, but the lack of long sequences and the complete absence of a spoken language to pair with the text leaves every theory open-ended. I once traced my fingers across a replica. The glyphs were shallow but deliberate. A bird with a curved beak, a figure with raised arms, a star or perhaps a flower. Each image carried a sense of intention, like ideograms trying to catch the breath of speech, a sentence frozen in wood. Was this truly writing or a ritual mnemonic device? A memory aid for oral tradition? Could it be both? The people of Rapa Nui called it Kohau Rongorongo, the lines of chanting. That phrase alone suggests a voice, a sound, a song that once filled the air around a sacred fire, and yet now only the carved silence remains. The mystery deepens when you remember how isolated Rapa Nui was. How could writing emerge in such a place when even nearby cultures had none? And why was it forgotten so completely, so quickly? As the sky dimmed and the surf rolled in, I sat near the base of a fallen moai, the glyphs still turning over in my mind. They speak in pictures, but the message is gone. The language, the sound, the rhythm, all swept away by time and tide. But then I heard whispers of another carving. On a mountain wall, far away, not in wood, but in stone. Enormous signs carved at human height, speaking a language lost before history was even written. Shall we go see the Sitovo inscription? The forest had grown thick over the years. Pine and beech crowded the slopes, muffling the wind and softening the sound of my boots on leaf-littered stone. I was in the Rhodope Mountains of Bulgaria, near the village of Sitovo. Few maps marked the path, and fewer still spoke of what lay above the valley. But I had followed the stories of shepherds, of soldiers, of symbols carved in stone, and after a long climb, I found it, a message, not on paper or clay, but etched into the living rock of a cliff face. The Sitovo inscription. 2 lines of enormous characters, some nearly half a meter tall, carved with precision into a vertical slab of stone. There were about 30 signs laid out in rows, their depth and clarity remarkable given their exposure to the elements. I ran my hand across them. The stone was cold, the marks weathered but firm. This was not the idle scratching of a traveler. This was deliberate, skilled, meant to last. No one knows what the signs say. They were discovered in the early 20th century by Bulgarian soldiers stationed nearby. Since then, the Sitovo inscription has puzzled archaeologists, linguists, and historians alike. The symbols do not match the known alphabets of the ancient Balkans. They are not Greek, not Thracian, not Latin or Cyrillic. Some resemble characters from the Vinča script, others echo runes. But no match is exact. The message remains locked. Theories have bloomed in the silence. Some suggest the inscription is Thracian, an ancient language once spoken in this region, but almost entirely lost. Others believe it could be Phrygian, or even a variant of an early Slavic tongue. A few have gone further, proposing links to the mysterious Vinča signs from the Danube Valley, suggesting a cultural thread stretching back thousands of years. But these are just echoes, possibilities in place of answers. As I stood beneath the stone, clouds passing over the ridge, I tried to imagine who had carved it. A scribe of some forgotten kingdom? A priest leaving a sacred declaration? Was this a boundary marker? A royal decree? Or perhaps a funerary chant for a buried hero? What makes the inscription all the more compelling is its size and visibility. This was not hidden. It was placed to be seen, read by those passing below. It carried meaning, authority, and yet its context has crumbled. There are no nearby ruins, no matching texts, just the silent wall and the forest that has since reclaimed it. Some believe it is a hoax, that it was carved in modern times to stir interest or mystery. But that idea, while tempting to skeptics, does not match the wear patterns or the style of the signs. The grooves are deep, weathered, ancient. I crouched near the base of the rock, brushing away pine needles. A fallen branch had splintered nearby, but the stone stood untouched, unbothered. The marks above me had survived centuries of weather, of war, of forgetting, but they had not survived translation. As twilight stretched through the trees, I stared up one last time. The symbols seemed to shift in the fading light, like letters from a dream, too old to read, too bold to ignore. And then my path turned east again, toward the Caucasus, where a lake hides a basalt tablet, carved with characters no one has yet named, a script from a people we know almost nothing about. But the signs are there, and they are waiting. Shall we go? The lake was still when I arrived. Its surface mirrored the overcast sky, broken only by the occasional ripple of wind. I had come to the Republic of Georgia, to a quiet basin near Lake Bash Plemi. Few knew of the site. Fewer still had seen what was hidden beneath its soil. But word had reached me of a discovery, an artifact carved in basalt, covered in a script that no one recognized. And in the hush of early morning I found it. They call it the Bash Plemi Lake Tablet. It was a dark slab, heavy and cold. Carved with care, it bore 7 neat lines of symbols, arranged horizontally, over 60 characters in all, each one precise, angular, almost mathematical in its symmetry. Some looked like crosses, others resembled birds or geometric forms. None matched the alphabets we know. Not Georgian, not Greek, not Aramaic or Phoenician. It was something entirely other. No one has deciphered it. The tablet was found buried not far from the water's edge and dated to a time between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE. That places it in an age of transition, when kingdoms rose and fell across the Caucasus. Yet nothing else quite like it has ever surfaced. No companion texts, no partial translations, just this single voice in stone, speaking to a silence that has lasted for over 2,000 years. I crouched beside the slab and ran my hand across its face. The carvings were deep, drilled by hand with tools that left faint spiral marks within the grooves. Whoever made this had skill, precision, intent. This was not a casual marking. This was language, or something meant to feel like it. What kind of culture made this? That is still unknown. Georgia has long been a crossroads of empire and migration. Sumerians, Persians, Scythians, Greeks, and Romans all passed through. Yet the script on the Bash Plemi tablet seems to belong to none of them. It stands apart, self-contained, a message from a people we have yet to name. Some researchers believe the tablet could represent a local script, developed by a now-lost tribe or kingdom. Others suspect it may have been ceremonial or symbolic, not meant to be read in a traditional sense, a form of sacred geometry, a ritual code. a record of cosmic order, but there is no way to be certain. I imagined the person who carved it, bent over the stone, perhaps in a temple, perhaps alone, the lake reflecting the stars overhead. Was it a prayer, a warning, a contract sealed by the gods? The tablet keeps its secrets well. Even more puzzling is that no other object from the region bears the same writing. It is a singular artifact, like a shout in the dark with no echo. That silence raises questions. Was this the work of one person, a single community, or have we simply failed to find the others? As I stood and looked out across the still waters of the lake, I felt the weight of the unknown pressing in. There are places in this world where time folds in on itself, where history speaks in symbols instead of stories. This was one of them. And beyond the Caucasus, across jungles thick with vines and cities swallowed by green, there lies another script. One partially deciphered, one that sings of gods and kings, of sacrifice and star calendars. But even there, among the glyphs of the Maya, whole voices remain unheard. Shall we continue? The jungle was thick with steam. The canopy above swayed gently, casting shifting shadows across stone. I had come to the ruins of a forgotten city deep in the heart of Mesoamerica. The vines had wrapped themselves around the walls, swallowing doorways and corridors. But even beneath centuries of silence, the stones still spoke. For here, among the temples and pyramids of the Maya, a written language once flourished, and much of it, still today, lies unread. I stood before a towering stela, its surface carved with rows of glyphs, each one intricate, each one shaped like a miniature sculpture. Faces, animals, eyes, hands, symbols enclosed in square frames, stacked one upon another like blocks of sacred thought. The Maya script is one of the most visually complex writing systems in the world, and even now we only understand part of what it says. Over the past century, scholars have deciphered much. We can read names, dates, some verbs and titles. We know how to pronounce many of the sounds. From these breakthroughs, we have pieced together dynasties, battles, rituals. We know the names of kings who ruled for decades, the gods they worshipped, the stars they tracked. But whole passages remain mysterious, sentences that elude us, glyphs that appear only once, phrases that refuse translation. The writing system is logosyllabic, a mixture of symbols representing whole words and others representing sounds. The combinations can shift and morph depending on the context. And sometimes, the meaning seems designed to hide itself. I remember tracing the glyphs with a soft brush, dust rising in the humid air. One inscription showed a king seated on a jaguar throne, his name encased in a cartouche shaped like a serpent's head. The date was clear, somewhere around the 7th century CE. But the surrounding glyphs? Still unread. Were they praises? A warning? A prophecy? Many of the surviving texts come from monumental inscriptions on stelae, temple lintels, staircases. Others are found on ceramics, jewelry, bones. A few, like the Dresden Codex, are folded books of bark paper, painted with vivid red and black inks. These codices speak of astronomy, ritual cycles, and sacred offerings. But even there, lines remain opaque, meanings slip between the cracks. It is also likely that much of the language was poetic, symbolic, layered in metaphor. The Maya did not always write to explain. They wrote to evoke, to conjure, to honor, and sometimes to conceal. When the Spanish arrived, much of this tradition was lost, The colonizers burned thousands of Maya texts, calling them works of the devil. Only a handful survived, and with them, a fraction of the keys we needed to unlock the full beauty of the script. I walked through the ball court, its walls still echoing with the weight of ceremony. On one panel, I saw glyphs showing the movement of Venus, the planet as god, as omen, as executioner. The Maya knew its orbit with astounding precision. But what did the full passage say? What prophecy was etched here in stone? Some glyphs have only been seen once. Their meaning is guessed from context. Others seem related to common words, but carry unexpected nuances. Even now, decipherment is ongoing, piece by piece, line by line. It is like brushing away layers of vines, revealing not just history, but personality, emotion, presence, and still, some voices are locked away. From these jungles, I turned toward the Nile, toward a river that gave birth to its own mysteries. Not just the hieroglyphs of pharaohs, but a script of spells and secrets, written by priests, hidden in scrolls, a language that moved between worlds. Shall we go there next? The light was golden as I stepped onto the banks of the Nile. The river flowed slow and steady, carrying centuries in its current. Palms swayed in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a heron lifted into the air, silent and smooth. Egypt is a place where the past does not sleep. It lingers, in stone, in sand, and in ink. And deep within the shadows of temples and tombs, I found a language written not for history, but for the hidden. This was not the hieroglyphic script carved into monuments or painted on sarcophagi. This was something more intimate, a language of ink on papyrus, a priest's hand rather than a king's, a whisper instead of a proclamation. It was called hieratic, the sacred script, a cursive form of writing used for thousands of years by temple scribes to record prayers, rituals, and spells. It moved faster than hieroglyphs, flowed like the river itself. In a museum archive, I unrolled a scroll under soft lamplight. The papyrus crackled gently, brown, dry, fragile. Lines of dark ink stretched across its surface, slanted and flowing, like reeds bent by wind. It was a passage from the Book of Thoth, a collection of magical texts said to grant knowledge of the gods, the speech of animals, even the power to raise the dead. My breath caught as I followed the curves of the script. This was not just writing, it was incantation. And much of it we still cannot read. Although we can translate many hieratic texts, especially administrative or religious ones, a large portion of the magical and esoteric literature remains only partly understood. Some words appear nowhere else. Some symbols shift meaning depending on context. Others are deliberately obscure, written in cryptographic variants, secret signs used only by the initiated. It is a language designed to conceal as much as it reveals. I traced a spell meant to ward off serpents. It listed divine names, strange verbs, and symbolic instructions, mixing herbs, drawing signs, invoking stars. But some phrases refused to yield. The grammar twisted, the meaning fragmented. Was this protection? A threat? A story wrapped in metaphor? It was like trying to follow the path of a dream, only to have it dissolve underfoot. Hieratic was the language of the priesthood, the ones who guarded the temples, who chanted in darkness before dawn, who wrote for the gods, not for men. Over time, it became even more elusive, evolving into demotic, a script used for legal contracts, letters, and later, more spells. With each stage, the writing became harder to decipher, and the knowledge more guarded. The ancient Egyptians believed that words had power. To name something was to control it. To write it was to make it real. That is why magical texts were hidden, buried with the dead, locked in coffins, written in code. They were never meant for common eyes, only for those trained in the deep ways, the silent ways. I closed the scroll gently, the scent of old paper rising with the motion. Around me, the room was still. The gods of Egypt had long since fallen silent, but their words, half known, half mystery, still waited in the shadows. And then I turned eastward, toward the edge of Syria, toward ruins older than belief, where broken clay might hold the first alphabet ever carved. Letters not as prayer, but as speech, as structure, as the foundation of every word that would follow. Shall we go to Tel Mara? The ruins rose out of the soil like broken teeth, cracked, sun-bleached walls half buried under centuries of wind and earth. I had come to northern Syria, near the ancient site of Tel Mara. The land here had once been fertile, fed by the Orontes River, crisscrossed by traders and empires. Now it was silent, but the silence was not empty. Beneath my boots, beneath the scattered pottery and fractured altars, something had been left behind, a language, or something close to it. The discovery was almost accidental, a set of clay fragments unearthed during excavation, small, unassuming, yet bearing signs that did not match the known scripts of Mesopotamia. These were not cuneiform. They were sharper, simpler, more abstract, linear shapes repeated with a rhythm. Some curved, others jagged, 30 or so signs in total, not pictures, letters. Some scholars believe these may be the earliest known alphabetic symbols ever found, predating even the Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions carved into the cliffs of Egypt's mining roads. If true, these signs could represent the very first attempt to record language using individual sounds, not symbols for ideas or words. The beginning of what would one day become letters. I held one of the fragments in my hand. It was no bigger than a coin. The inscription was shallow, its lines worn by time, but they were still there, deliberate, repeating, structured. A system, not a random set of marks. Someone had encoded speech into this surface, but we do not yet know how to read it. The problem is context. These signs were found alone. No bilingual key, no long texts to compare. And the society that made them has long since disappeared. Its records buried or burned. The script remains unidentified. It may be Ugaritic, it may be Hurrian, or it may be something entirely distinct, a fleeting experiment that never caught on, swallowed by the weight of larger civilizations. Still, something about it feels intimate. Unlike the vast epics of Mesopotamia, this script seems personal, like a ledger, a list, perhaps a name, perhaps a prayer whispered in the dark, captured by a stylus before the sun could rise. As I walked through the site, the dry wind picked up. I could see the ridges of once bustling streets, the outlines of courtyards, the shattered bones of temples. This had been a city, a center of life, and somewhere among its ruins, Someone once sat with a lump of clay and scratched a new kind of mark into the world. A mark that said, "This is sound. This is language. This is me." And though the signs are few, the implications are vast. If these are truly alphabetic, they change the timeline. They suggest that the idea of an alphabet did not spring from a single place, but emerged from many corners at once, parallel sparks in the dark. What happened to this script? Did it vanish because the culture vanished? Or was it absorbed, overwritten by more dominant forms of writing? The evidence is scarce. The mystery deepens. As the sun dipped low behind the ruins, I looked down once more at the fragment in my hand. It was simple, rough, and yet it carried the weight of revolution, a new way to think, a new way to preserve thought. And just when I thought I had reached the earliest edge of writing, I was reminded of a book, a strange one, bound in vellum, filled with drawings of plants that do not exist and words no one has ever spoken aloud. A manuscript unlike any other, a mystery unto itself. Shall we open the Voynich Manuscript? The library was silent, the air thick with the scent of old paper and time. I sat alone at a long wooden table, the only light coming from a single lamp overhead. In front of me rested a book. It was bound in vellum, stained with age, its pages thick and uneven. I reached out, carefully opened the cover, and there it was, the Voynich Manuscript, a book unlike any other, filled with drawings of impossible plants, strange women bathing in green pools, star maps, and most puzzling of all, it was found in 1912, hidden in a trunk of forgotten manuscripts at a Jesuit college in Italy. Since then, it has passed through the hands of cryptographers, linguists, codebreakers, and historians. Even the experts at Bletchley Park, the minds who cracked the Nazi Enigma machine, tried their hand at it. None succeeded. The script flows with elegance, smooth curves, distinct letter-like forms. It looks like it should make sense. It feels like a language. Some characters repeat often, others rarely. There's punctuation, even paragraph breaks. But no other document on Earth uses this writing system. It appears to be a one-of-a-kind code. As I flipped through its pages, I saw the illustrations. Bright greens and blues still vivid after centuries. Plants that do not match any known species. Circular diagrams filled with stars and moons. Strange cosmologies. Naked figures tangled in pipes and pools. It reads like a blend of biology, astronomy, alchemy, and dream. Some believe the manuscript is a hoax, a clever forgery created to mystify and mislead. But if so, it is an incredibly sophisticated one. The patterns in the script follow linguistic rules, frequency, word length, even grammar-like structure. It is consistent across over 200 pages. That would be nearly impossible to fake convincingly. It behaves like a language, just not one we recognize. Others believe it may be a cipher, a coded version of an existing language. But no key has ever worked. Some say it is a constructed language, an invented tongue with its own grammar and rules, a private language of a lone scholar, or perhaps a forgotten dialect encoded in a system no longer used. The origin of the manuscript remains a mystery. Radiocarbon dating places the vellum in the early 15th century, around the time of the Renaissance. But the script does not match anything from that era, and the contents do not align with the science or symbolism of any known culture. It seems to float outside time. I remember one page in particular, a circular chart divided into concentric rings with zodiac signs surrounding nude figures holding stars. It looked like a calendar, a ritual, a passage through something unseen. I stared at it for hours, lost in the symmetry, the suggestion of meaning, and the total absence of clarity. Many have claimed to solve it. Dozens of theories have emerged: Hebrew, Nahuatl, shorthand Latin, codes, glossolalia, alien languages. Each time the manuscript holds firm, silent, smiling. As I closed the book, I felt its weight, not just physical, but psychological. It is a riddle made real, a voice from a world that may never have existed, or perhaps a world we have simply forgotten how to hear. And so I return to the map, to the list of scripts and signs, tablets and tablets of language left unread. One more remained, a final passage, not a single code or character, but the reflection of all of them, a reminder that some scripts do not speak, they wait. Shall we go there? The fire was low when I wrote my final notes. Outside the tent, the stars had begun to fade into a pale horizon. The wind was quiet, the world was still, and I found myself thinking back, not to one site or one script, but to all of them. The signs I had followed across deserts and jungles, symbols scratched in clay, carved in stone, inked on fading parchment, words that had once spoken, but now refused to yield. There is something humbling in their silence. The Indus script, Linear A, Cypro-Minoan, the Phaistos Disc, Proto-Elamite, Vinča, Bashu, Rongo-Rongo, Sitovo, Bashplemi, Maya glyphs not yet read, Egyptian spells we cannot fully decode, the oldest alphabetic marks from the Levant, and the eerie spiraling letters of the Voynich Manuscript. Each one tells a story without telling it. Each one hints at voices that once filled cities, homes, temples, voices that debated, worshipped, recorded, traded, dreamed. Those voices are now quiet, but the letters remain. What do we make of that? I think of the hands that wrote them, calloused from farming, ink-stained from ritual, steady with royal decree, trembling with wonder. Did they believe their words would last? That someone far away in time would read and understand? Or were the scripts meant only for the moment? For a day, a season, a life? Were they ever meant to be eternal? Not every mystery wants to be solved, and not every code will give us its key. But still, we try. We gather the fragments, we trace the patterns, we compare, interpret, hope, we listen. Some say these scripts are failures, that they vanished without legacy. But I see something else. I see a chorus of lost voices, still singing beneath the surface of time. Not gone, just waiting for someone to ask the right question, to listen long enough, to see the shape behind the shadow. I think of the child in the Indus Valley, marking a toy with symbols, the priest on Crete carving Linear A into a clay tablet, the scribe in Elam recording numbers we will never add, the elder on Rapa Nui chanting beside a tablet of Rongo-Rongo as the tide came in, the nameless writer of the Voynich pages, drawing a language from nothing but imagination and ink. They did not all fail. In fact, they remind us that language is more than function. It is a trace, a signal, a hope that someone, someday, will hear and understand. And perhaps That is enough. So here we are, 15 fragments from history's unbroken silence, 15 scripts that refuse to yield, each one a lock without a key, a question written not in answers but in wonder. And as I closed my notebook, I knew this journey was not over. There are still signs to find, still codes hidden in caves, libraries, ruins, vaults. Still voices beneath the surface of history waiting for us to learn how to listen again. Because the past does not disappear, it waits. Shall we keep going? The ink is dry, the pages are closed, but the journey lingers. We have walked through deserts and forests, climbed mountains, waded through rivers thick with memory. We have stood in the ruins of temples, brushed dust from tablets, held seals, discs, scrolls, and slates, and in each one we found the same thing, not an answer, but a question. Why do these scripts remain unread? Perhaps it is because they belong to a kind of silence we no longer understand. A silence shaped by symbols, carried across time not by speech, but by mark and gesture. These were not just ways to record transactions or tell stories. They were ways to reach beyond the limits of a single life, ways to be remembered. And yet, they slipped through our fingers. Still, that does not mean they are gone. The Indus script still waits beneath the river soil. Linear A still clings to temple stone. The Voynich Manuscript still rests on its shelf, closed but alive in mystery. The language is there, the meaning is close, and sometimes the pursuit itself is what matters most. Because each attempt to read these forgotten codes is also an attempt to understand ourselves, what we value, what we fear, what we dream. We are not just translators. We are listeners, seekers. We trace the symbols not only to recover a lost word, but to feel the breath of those who made it. And maybe that is the real message, that the past is not static, it is not sealed, it is still speaking, just not always in ways we expect. So if you ever find yourself standing before an ancient wall, if you see symbols that do not make sense, do not look away. Stop, breathe, listen, because some stories do not shout, some only whisper. And history, when it chooses to speak, does not always speak in a language we know, but it speaks all the same, and it waits for you.